Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us today Altagracia Pierre-Outerbridge, who's going to be discussing the right to counsel. That's how I know it, the law, with respect to tenants. Altagracia, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Before we get started, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself? What kind of work you do? Maybe your history as attorney. Why don't you tell us?
Sure. So I started as an attorney, as a housing attorney. It's all I've really ever done. I was a legal aid attorney, a legal services attorney representing low-income tenants throughout New York City. I've pretty much practiced as a low-income tenant housing attorney all through all the boroughs except Staten Island. So I've been doing this for about 15 years. So I've been around town. I now practice in my own firm as a private attorney for tenants, mostly tenants, and some landlords.
You know, way back when I was a court attorney, the judge and I, who I was assigned to, we were in housing court. And I remember many times, they really had no one to advocate for them. We almost had to advocate for them as a judge and as judge and court attorney because they just didn't understand. Has that been changed, or what are your thoughts about, tenants who just don't seem to have anyone to advocate for themselves?
Lots of thoughts. I'll say that I practiced as a legal services attorney and a legal aid attorney before the right to counsel. We changed the lay of the land and provided low-income tenants with counseling in housing court as a right. Before then, most tenants did not have an attorney, or most landlords did. So since the right to counsel passed about 5 years ago, most tenants do have attorneys, and it really evened the playing field, made settlements a lot easier, I believe, and not the other way around.
Where do we find these attorneys? I mean, it's been 5 years. Are there enough of them? Because we're going to talk a second about, it doesn't look like the program is as strong as it could be. So where do we find the attorneys to begin with?
Sure. Number one is calling 311 and ask to be referred to legal services or legal aid. And they would actually give you, 311 will actually give you a number to call in your borough. The other thing tenants can do the other way is to actually go to housing court. Once you go to the resource center, they'll direct you to the office of the free housing lawyers in the courthouse. I'll say that most of the courthouse offices have been eliminated since the pandemic. But a short walk from the courthouse is most of these attorneys' offices, legal aid, legal services. So there are many of them.
All right, so let's say I was a tenant who's having an issue with my landlord, repairs weren't being made, or heat and hot water issues. I go to the judge and I try and argue my case. Nobody's listening to me. The attorney that I'm assigned to, or is assigned to me, how does that start? Do we meet each other in an office someplace? Do they speak to me on the phone? Is it virtually like this? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what happens is the intake now happens over Zoom in most courthouses, except some judges who have different rules. But most judges, the first appearance is for an intake, wherein the free housing lawyer is present on the intake. And every person is asked, do you need to speak to a free housing lawyer? And the tenant answers over the Zoom, yes or no. If they do answer yes, the housing attorney is there and takes their phone number and says, we will give you a call within 2 weeks. Please don't ignore your phone calls. And sometimes they'll ask right then and there, the tenant is asked, do you believe you qualify based on your income? It's a yes or no. The housing attorneys get to answer some questions as to what is a qualifier or not. The tenant's phone number is, the tenant states their phone number right on the record during the intake appearance, and they get a call from the housing attorney within the next 2 to 3 weeks, depending on availability. And it goes on from there. At the next appearance, the attorney would appear.
Okay. How do you qualify? What I mean, I'm sure that not everybody with an income can qualify. How do you qualify?
I don't know the numbers specifically because they changed, but it's based on an income threshold.
It is.
Tenants, so tenants who receive benefits most likely qualify, HRA, any SNAP, most likely qualify. So those are the quick answers as to whether you qualify. And once you qualify, you go through an intake and your case is discussed. Your case is discussed and the strategy is discussed with the attorney. The attorney puts in an answer and appears at the next appearance. Sometimes that doesn't happen, as we know, because these attorneys are now overwhelmed.
Why? What's going on? Why isn't the program being used? Too many cases, too few attorneys, both? I don't know.
It's absolutely both. It's absolutely both. During the pandemic, the cases were backlogged and now they're getting back on track. So it's an onslaught of cases. I know housing attorneys have asked that the cases be stopped because the tenants are not getting counsel. Therefore, the right to counsel is not working because the tenants are not getting counsel. And that's being discussed, whether these cases should go forward when the right to counsel is clamped up.
What are your thoughts in terms of the program? Is it working? And how would you change it if you had thoughts on that?
Well, I've worked on both ends of it. I've worked as an attorney before the right to counsel. I worked for organizations that took every single case, the hard ones, the easy ones. I'll say that before the right to counsel, organizations picked which cases they would take, the meritorious ones. After the right to counsel, if you meet the qualifications in terms of income and where you live, then your case has to be taken. I think it's a great program. You're able to talk to an attorney if it's an issue of, on the other side, if you're the landlord's attorney, if it's an issue of money, the attorney can help the tenant apply for benefits. Some tenants don't know they qualify. So a lot of cases are resolved that way. As a landlord's attorney, sometimes we represent some landlords. You get some pushback, but ultimately the judge decides the merits of the case. So the case may last longer, as it should, because folks are advocating their rights. So that may upset some landlords, right? Because the cases are taking longer, but ultimately the judge sees through what's right and what's wrong in the end.
But you mentioned that landlords have the right to the counsel as well?
No, so there is a small program that does advise landlords, and I'm glad you brought it up, but it's not large at all, and it's not a right to it. What the courts have done in the last few months is they've instituted a small property part, and the small property part is supposed to fast forward cases where they are small landlords. So that's supposed to help the small landlords who rely on the rent to pay the mortgage to not be as backlogged. So there is a small property part to alleviate that issue.
What do you see in terms of the biggest issue in terms of tenants and landlords with respect to, is it repairs, heat and hot water, mold, mildew, bed bugs? What do you see? You know, I will tell you, in my office, we have almost 100 to 200 bed bug cases where people have been bitten and there are permanent marks on their body. We have mold cases we've seen here. We have a ton of the mold cases. And of course, we have the usual, you know, broken steps and staircases and, you know, cleaning the buildings. But what do you see from a tenant's perspective? What are they complaining about the most, if you have any thoughts on that? Because you're really in there, you know?
I am really in there. I'm really in there. So I would say that most housing attorneys who are at least in private practice are dealing with whether the apartment is properly treated as regulated or unregulated. So a lot of landlords are treating apartments as unregulated apartments when they should be rent stabilized or rent controlled, and thereby are overcharging. So I would say 50% of our cases is my rent correct?
We've become a very tenant-friendly city, and we seem to be going more and more into that direction. Maybe you could look into your crystal ball and tell me what you think is coming down the line with respect to tenants. What's the next thing that we could do to protect them? Any thoughts on that? We don't have too much time.
I think the right to counsel needs more attorneys, more funding. That's one. I think the city could do a bit more of regulating whether landlords can, I don't know how, but the overcharge issue is huge, and tenants don't know they're being overcharged for years. So if there was some oversight from the city as to what landlords are charging, more than just the landlord merely reporting, self-reporting, then that would help a lot of tenants who have no idea they're being overcharged thousands of dollars.
Are they qualified, these attorneys who are assigned to them? I mean, listen, can anybody, and listen, let's say I'm not a landlord-tenant attorney. I don't know anything about landlord-tenant work? Do I just get to become an attorney and represent you? Don't I have to know a little bit about what I'm talking about?
That's a great question. So what happens is certain organizations have the grant, right? And the grant goes, so you would have to be working for these organizations to represent the tenants.
Okay, final thoughts. I'm a tenant right now. I'm watching. I'm having a hard time. I don't know what to do. I'm lost. I don't want to be evicted. I don't want to go to a shelter. I don't want to be homeless. What advice would you give me?
If you don't want to be evicted, watch out for any notices you receive from the landlord and show up in court and state your defenses.
Okay, great advice. Maybe you can come back next couple of months and tell us about the right to counsel law and whether you think it's working, not working, how we're fixing it. Because we really at today's verdict appreciate attorneys like you, because you take on those types of cases and the type of work that a lot of attorneys won't do. I know that for a fact. So, and I don't say that to too many guests who come on the show, but we really do appreciate the kind of work you do. I have clients who call me all the time trying to find landlord tenant attorneys. There aren't that many. So it's really, we really appreciate the kind of work you do here.
Thank you. It's definitely your niche, but it's very rewarding.
Yeah, I love it. All right, well, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this.